Good day, everybody. We're just going live now on Facebook and YouTube, so we're going to be broadcasting this, so you'll be able to catch it up later on and watch it all over again. Thanks to Hugh for coming along and doing this talk for us, and thanks to everyone here who's turned up. We weren't actually expecting a crowd this size, but you're all very welcome to Donegal Railway Heritage Centre. I'm Mark. I'm the chairman of the Board of Trustees here. I'm charged with keeping all this going for future generations so they can learn about the great history we had here of our railways. So with that, I'm going to hand over to you, and you can start us talk.
Thank you very much, Mark. I hope people can hear me. Are we okay at the back? You hear me good? Just listen very hard, and I'll go as slowly as I can. We're here, and I'm absolutely honoured and delighted to be here to talk about the bus services of the County Donegal Railways. And I wrote a wee book on them in 1973. And now, of course, I rewrote that book this year and brought it up to date. It's been a lifelong interest of mine, the County Donegal Railways Joint Committee. And it goes back to the time I was a wee boy of 7 on holidays in Bundoran. And we'd actually come to Bundoran from Belfast all the way by steam train on the Great Northern Railway. But I haven't time to tell you about that just now. So in Bundoran, every single week outside the post office, there was a wee red mail van. And on the door, it said, County Donegal Railways Joint Committee. And I said to my dad, what is that? And he said, well, son, it's a narrow gauge railway that runs throughout from Strabane to Ballyshannon to Donegal to Killybegs and to Glenties. And when I was a boy, he said, I used to cycle down from Derry and I'd race the train at Loch Esk and try to get over the level crossing. Now, it turned out he travelled on it. My mum had travelled on it as well because we have very close Donegal connections. And it was kind of legendary. So a couple of years passed. And like everybody else, my dad bought a car. So we drove to Donegal and we came over at Strabane. And here were all these railway engines and wagons sitting there. And we thought, what is this? I must find out more. And then a red and cream bus went past, and it County Donegal Railways crescent beside. And I thought, I need to find out much more. And in those days, there's no internet. I was 12 or 13. I thought I was the only guy in the world interested in buses and railways. I probably was then. And basically, I had to find out more. Sitting in school in Glasgow, a teacher called Jimmy Kelly, whose people came from Glenties, said, there's a book to take home and read for the weekend, son. And what was it? It was E.M. Patterson's History of the County Donegal Railways. Yeah. I read it in a whole weekend. And being a teacher, he gave me a test on it on the Monday. And I passed. And I then, as I'll tell you in a minute or two, got in touch with the CDR, which was at the age of 14, quite a thing to do. So if we move on to the next slide, please. The County Donegal Railways, as you all know, was famous for rail cars. Here's rail car 12 and 18 on the sadly closed Foyle Valley Railway. But what were rail cars? They were basically a bus on rails. And we're sitting in one just now. But here's a visual aid, County Donegal Railways rail bus. Number 4, built in 1928. It actually runs in a wee layout I have at home. I'm so sad. And there's the entrance. There's the luggage rack, and it could stop anywhere. And that's exactly what the famous Henry Forbes, the manager, got them to do. Stop anywhere, one man operated, the tickets were sold. But the great thing about them was, if you more people, you could put a wee trailer on behind them, see? And you could put more people and pull them for the cost of one driver and one guard. Not only that, you could put on a red wagon, fill it with mails, or if the Orange men were going to Rossnowla, you could put the big drum in it, and the banner, and the maces, and away you went. So they were amazing. They were world-beating. And the County Donegal Railways had the very first diesel rail car in Europe in 1931. So great things were done here. And I think, thank goodness, we're not forgetting it. So there's your rail cars. Let's move on a wee bit to what happens. 1929, the County Donegal Railways buys its very first bus. You see it's got a Northern Ireland registration because it was second-hand from a company in County Down. And it ran those buses from Glenty Station to Portneuf and to Ardra. And it wasn't a success because the roads were so bad, the buses fell apart in 3 years. And that one was actually converted into railcar number 9. So Henry Forbes, being as a manager, he was meaner than a Scotsman. I have to say that, really mean. He came from the north, right enough, but he was meaner than a Scotsman. And he made sure that he used that body on the railcar and he ran it on his railway. So nothing was lost, but the CDR was really getting hammered by bus competition. In the 1930s, you had companies like Cacharwood who came in from the north. They were running from Portneuf to Donegal, they were running Sligo-Derry, and they were undercutting the railway by up to 50%. So they were losing fares all the time. So they thought, we have to do something about this. So if we go on, Mark, thanks. They sat down with the Great Northern Railway of Ireland, and they sat down with the Lough Swilly Railway, and they agreed in 1932 where each company would run. The County Donegal Railways would have the south and west, the Swilly of the north. And since the County Donegal Railways was half owned by the Great Northern, who are very good at running buses, they put the contract out to them to run the County Donegal routes for them. And that lasted right up until 1958. Now, when I was a wee boy in Bundoran, I would see these passing every day. We sat outside McManus's boarding house waiting for a tea. It was tea in those days, you know, no dinners, no avocados, no halloumi. You got your tea and chips. And bus would go past showing Portneuf on its screen. And the door would open and a pile of newspapers would pile out the sides as it rode past. And it showed Portneuf on its screen. And Mr. Malarkey would come out as newsagents and get his papers. And it was the evening press delivered from Dublin that same day. So do we think we're really clever now? Anyway, I'll tell you a story about one of these. They were solidly built. They were built by the GNR at their works in Dundalk. And in 1958, I've never forgotten this, we were on holiday in Bundoran, and my mum and dad said to me and my sister, "We've got a big surprise for you. We're going on a bus tour," because we hadn't a car. "Oh, great. Where are we going?" Rossnowla, Ross's Point. "We're going to Knock." Now, it's a long way from Bundoran. So in came the bus, Bundoran station, on we went, and the conductor, Carr, who came from Kilcar, as soon as we got out the bus station, he started to say the rosary. Now, we were still saying the rosary by the time we reached Knock, and I think we were on the 3,000, happy mystery, God help us. But anyway, it was quite an experience. I never forgot it. And we got to Knock. So my big sister bought a wee. Knock in those days, when you arrived, it was full of stalls that sold memorabilia and holy tat, basically. She got a wee pair of binoculars. And when you looked through them, a lady appeared to you. It was great for sixpence. You know, say if you're going to Lourdes. And then, in fact, I bought a wee holy water pistol. It squirted not water. So I took it back to Glasgow. And I squirted all my Protestant friends, but it didn't work because they didn't go to Mass on Sunday morning. Anyway, there's my memory. Super buses, but interestingly, they worked right in closely with the trains of the CDR. They connected with them. You could do a book, and if you look at the CDR timetable for 1957, we find on page, whatever it is, Road Motor Services. That's what they called them. Very old-fashioned title. County Donegal Railways, run by GNR, Mallinmore, Killybegs, Glenties and Low, Sonorla Glenties. And what happened was, in 1947, when the Glenties branch closed, the GNR buses ran on it. And also they introduced a new route from Ballybofey to Letterkenny using these, because people from Ballybofey could reach Letterkenny without going through the dreaded customs, which I'll tell you more about in a minute. You also need to know that we've got a neighbour who never forgot the Gardner buses. When she was a wee girl, she and her 8 siblings would go to stay with their granny in Portneuf, and they come down to Derry on the boat from Glasgow. They get the train down to Strabane. At Strabane, they changed the rail car, and at Ballybofey, they went into Duncan's Cafe with their granny, who fed them full of food, chips, everything. Now, these were very bouncy buses. And round about Fintown, they were all outside. And, you know, they weren't wonderfully comfortable. That's her memory. And half of our neighbours in Glasgow travel in the CDR. It's amazing. Anyway, if we can move on, that's very briefly that. Then in 1959, the County Donegal Railways decides to withdraw its trains on the main line, Killybegs, the branch to Ballyshannon, and the Letterkenny Road, and the whole of its railway operation. Now, this tells you they're going to run the buses, they're going to run them as well as they can, and they'll be to the same timetables as the train. Now, there's a lot of things happen at this time. B.L. Curran, the famous manager, is actually dragged in front of Donegal County Council in November that year. And they say to him, Curran, what the hell's happening when the trains are going off? And he has to tell them, we'll run replacement buses, but we don't know who's going to run them. It might be CIE, it might be ourselves. And for a real interesting fact, the papers were pushing for the Lough Swilly Railway Company to take over the whole of Donegal. But that was never going to happen because their headquarters was in Derry. So there was a whole problem here. And the general feeling, if you read the railway books, is, well, nobody wanted the CDR to close. But if you actually go back and do what I've done, I've gone into all the old newspapers of the time. There's different views on it. I did that over the winter and I got a lot of stuff from them. But a lot of people thought the narrow gauge was old-fashioned. B.L. Curran actually says to the councillors, we've been dissipating our energy for the last 15 years running a narrow gauge railway. We're going on the buses will save us money and they'll bring back all the passengers. And is that what happened? I'm afraid it didn't. But a very uncertain time for the railway staff. If you think of the guys that worked for the CDR in 1959, there were 150 of them. And B.L. Curran says, we'll lose 50 staff. We'll give them redundancy, we'll pension them and all the rest of it. Signalmen, track workers, guys in the works. But they transferred a lot of lads on to the buses. A lot of rail card guards became conductors. I will say a word about conductors in a minute. A lot of rail card drivers became bus drivers. And the big problem for them was to remember to turn the wheel. Because you didn't have to in a rail car. So there's the withdrawal notice. What do we get then? We get, come here. Sorry, there's the very first timetable. Road Passenger Services 1960. And there's all the routes there. And they handed these out to people to make sure they knew that the County Donegal Railways Joint Committee, not any old bus company, but the railway was still going to be there. So we move on, Mark, again. And here's the route map of the buses. This is from the timetable. You notice the border seems to cut round Derry. Very interesting. Do you notice there's the border? And it goes right down past Carrigan's. So they withdrew, the County Donegal Railways redrew the border, but nobody else could. And here's the routes up to Dunlow, out to Portneuf, where E152 used to run, Glencolmkill, and it covered the whole country, the whole county. And at Letterkenny, it connected, of course, with the Lough Swilly, and more importantly, at Strabane, with the broad gauge trains of the GNR and later the UTA. So you get a comprehensive route map, and it is interesting, that, isn't it? That could cause a bit of trouble, I would think. But anyway, next one, please, Mark. Now, what did they look like, the first buses? Well, they hired them from CIE. Why did they hire them from CIE? Because up until 3 weeks before, they didn't know they were going to be running them. So they didn't buy new ones. They bought them. And this is taken at Lifford Station. The CDR liked using the old stations. They kept them nearly all open. And this is Strabane Station over here. And they actually laid a roadway on the old railway track so they could run the buses and the lorries right across, because the bridge, which was leading into Strabane, the road bridge, was falling down. And before they did this, people were getting off at the customs. And this is the customs men, by the way. Here's the driver up the top in the roof rack, taking down this massive suitcases. And those, do you remember those? No wee wheels on them. And you had to be very fit as a CDR driver conductor. In fact, here's one of these buses. We haven't until we've got another one. I brought it along. There's its roof rack. Wheel ladder up the back doors, and these were really rugged buses. But CIE forgot to put heaters in them, and there were complaints about that because all the rail cars had heaters. So what you're looking at there is this poor wee lady is having her suitcase opened, and they went through everything at the customs. It was astonishing. And basically, You were stopped at Lifford if you're coming into the Republic. You were stopped at Lifford coming out, stopped at Strabane on the way in. So you couldn't escape the customs men. As the old song says, the customs men are route, but we won't go there. So there's what it looked like. The CDR bus, very solid, dependable, serving people to the railway timetables, going up to Letterkenny, and they're the crew working for their money. And we'll see more about that in a minute. The next one, please, Matt. Now, the Donegal Railway buses have been honoured by an artist. The good Mr. Baird of Letterkenny did this superb pen and ink drawing of one of the buses. There's its crest going to Letterkenny at the Dry Arch, the original Dry Arch that took the Lough Swilly over into Letterkenny. So the CDR buses have been commemorated in art. There you are. How about that? So if we move on again, the roadway that they ran over to Strabane, actually, there's special notice trying to stop people using it. And it says the Strabane and Letterkenny Railway Company, because the Strabane and Letterkenny Railway, which ran the railway from Strabane to Letterkenny, was opened in 1909. And it was a separate company from the CDR. The buses were legally part of the Strabane and Letterkenny Railway when they ran there. So this notice appeared, and it was the old track bed. Mark me. I'm sorry these are so small, by the way. I apologise for this. You can see them in the book if you buy it, you know. 1963 timetable, County Donegal Railways Joint Committee. There's all the routes and connections. And this is very, very important. The CDR was very much sold on connections. And if you look at the wee timetable booklet that came out, here's my copy from 1965 when I was 14, June 1965. There's pages and pages, connection from England to Scotland via Strabane Larne, and it tells you can leave Killybegs at 7:55 and be in Glasgow St Enoch at 11:51, and so on. I mean, you think we're quite good at what we do. You could buy a through ticket from anywhere in the British railway system because the CDR was half owned by the Great Northern and half by British Railways. So you could go on the bus at Killybegs and say a single ticket to Dundee, and the guy would say, "Aye, fine, I would issue the ticket, not a problem." Was Donegal well connected? Yes, very much so. And what the CDR is doing with this, it's saying, you might have lost the railway, but we're solid and dependable, and we're still here. And you also got a bit of poetry in this in the adverts. Dyed teas, always in the back page. A cup of good tea is a famous restorer in sadness. You having one? It quickens life flame and enlivens the brain and infuses a spirit of gladness. Is that not great? Or you can go to the Abbey Hotel and so on. But it was supported by advertising, very comprehensive, it was free. And there's this lovely picture on the front, and they're now collector's items, so hands off. So that's it. Now, they issued all the new staff with a special circular, and it tells you who's doing what, and it tells conductors you will be dismissed immediately if you can't account for everybody on your bus. I was talking to somebody about bus conductors a while ago, and they didn't know what they were. If you don't remember them, they're very hard to find in the British Isles today. There's none in Ireland, I believe. You'll see them in the Sheffield trams. And for my sins, I was a bus conductor. Between 1968 and 1972, I was at university, and my holiday job was a conductor for 3 years on the Western SMT buses out of Glasgow. They did a lot of routes at the CDR, and I drove for my last year on those routes. I even drove a Leopard, and we'll talk about that, how you get first gear in a Leopard with difficulty. But what B.L. Curran said to his staff, and mark these words, in the circular he said, "You depend as the company depends on public support. Even if common humanity did not call for courtesy, the public should receive it as customers. Efficiency brings reward in due course, though through the good conscience that comes of duty well done may appear adequate reward in itself." Now, could you imagine a boss putting that out to staff today? They'd all walk out and say they had been humiliated. Anyway, this is an amazing document because it tells you exactly what's going to happen. And that actually was donated to the museum by Cyril McIntyre, who was the former press officer for Bus Ern. So here it's all happening. We move on again. Now, the headquarters were at Stranorlar. Isn't that a wonderful building? Built in 1863 as the terminus of the Finn Valley Railway. And you had this marvellous crest which said, "Be just and fear not." So when County Donegal Railways drivers and conductors went through the doors to start their shift, they read, "Be just and fear not." So they were very, very upright, you know. And sadly, this building, which housed the headquarters, was demolished when CIA took over in 1974. And we'll say a word about that as we go, but that's where the work was done. And that's the door that I knocked as a wee boy to see if I could come in and find out a bit more. So we'll say a word about, and that van, by the way, the red van without the crest was the inspector's van, because the crews didn't always see it coming. Anyway, if we move on, Mark. Now, here's some of the staff. This gentleman here is the famous Bernard L. Curran, who was the general manager. They're all looking a bit stern, aren't they? And Danny Boyle, Patricia. Now, we have in the back seat, not to embarrass her, Danny Boyle's daughter, Patricia. And there's Maureen McGillivray. Now, Danny and Maureen were great to me. They gave me all sorts of stuff out of the archives. They gave me free passes sometimes. And as a wee boy, I went round. And Ricky Dunyan here became the boss after the takeover. And Mr. Ward was down Donegal Town. So we say a bit about that, but there's the headquarters staff. So how did I approach BL Curran? If we move on, I'm conscious of time. Well, here's me. This is me at 16. I haven't changed at all. In Strabane with one of the buses. CDR lorry. I will say a word about the lorries before we finish. Comet, yeah. And this is one of the buses that we're talking about. The Leyland Tiger Cubs. What a super name for a bus. Tommy might have driven one. Was that for your time, Tommy? Yeah. Well, there you are. Sorry about that. And this is me at 16. And I went round and I took pictures of the buses. I got to know the crews. But if we go on to the next one, I wrote a letter. I'll just read you it. It was from Master H. Dougherty. We were very formal in those days. And this is 8th of December 1965. I heard the new buses, the CDR. So I got the address and I wrote to Mr. Curran. And my mother came in and says, "There's a letter for you, son." And I've got a letter at the age of 14. And it was from BL Curran himself. And he told me all about the new buses and enclosed a copy of the timetable. They were great at helping people that were interested. And the interesting thing was that my mother was out the next day and a gentleman called Mr. McLean, who came from Ballybuffet and lived beside us in Glasgow, said, "I hear your boy was writing to the manager at Ballybuffet." And she said, "How do you know that?" And he said, "Maureen McGillivray is BL Curran's secretary. She's my niece." And there was this, I mean, in Glasgow, you're always deeply tied to Donegal. And as soon as I went in to meet them, they said, "Oh, come on in." I was a cup of tea and all the rest of it. And they couldn't have been more welcoming. And Danny Boyle, as we'll say later, was one of the first people to recognise the importance of railway heritage. It's actually a mistake in that he said the wrong company. But anyway, it actually should be East Midland. It's not East Midland, it should be East. Well, anyway, so that's it. So there's a real letter from the County Donegal Railways Joint Committee in 1965, 6 years after the last train ran, if you think about it, but still a railway company. They were sure of that. They weren't just a bus company. Mark, if we could. Now, here is the Doughty lads before their bus, a P bus. This lad's Collins Lafferty. Who was it? Sorry?
I remember.
Do you remember him? Ex-rail car driver. Collins was a great guy. There's two things to note. He's actually got his cigarette there because all the buses, we'll see later, carried adverts for cigarettes. It's amazing. Everybody smoked. And if you got on a CDR bus, it said first 6 seats, no smoking. All the rest could smoke. So if you're sitting in front 6 seats, it was clear that the smoke would kind of stop there, you know. And, you know, Collins is puffing away. It was an offence to smoke in the cab. And the rule book, which I have here as well, the rule book actually says smoking. I'll read you the page. Crews may not smoke when the vehicle is in action, but they may smoke in front at the terminus. The other interesting thing is he's got a wee badge on, a pioneer pin. Whatever happened to pioneer pins? You see them everywhere. And Jimmy McKinley here has got his set right ticket machine and his cash bag. Now, these were wonderful ticket machines. They were actually issued tickets very quickly. They recorded everything that was done. But in his cash bag, Jimmy also had 15 different documents to allow for through rail tickets. People could come on with a train ticket from Glasgow and he to record that and issue a thing against it. I have here brought my set right ticket machine with the box. And we'll do a wee demonstration for you. If you hold on for a second, that's if it opens, of course. And it will. We did this morning, honestly. Oh, come on. Open the box, they're shouting. Wait a minute. Get a car key. Sorry about this. Talk amongst yourself for a second. For like this. This used to happen to conductors. Wait me a second. That's it. We're away. We're away. Right. The set right ticket machine came with a bike. So that's how he's wearing it. Conductor put that on eventually once he got his box open. And without twisting it, more or less. And then he put the set right onto the back plate and he was ready to conduct his bus. They were, in fact, you could issue tickets. There's a pre-decimal one. And the conductor would say, according to the rule book, "Where are you going, sir?" In fact, what he would say to people is, "Where are you going?" And you would say,
Strabane.
Strabane. Strabane, sir. Thank you. That would be 12 shillings and sixpence. Now, when the CDR started and right up to 1971, it went decimal. Whole Ireland, Britain went decimal. February 1971, February. But before that, in fact, at that time, there were no punts, there were no euros, and it was a common sterling currency everybody used. So you could pay with Scottish pound notes, English pound, anything. So these guys cashed in. And the end of a shift, it was busy. They could cash in a couple of £100. It was surprising. And it was all cash. No bank cards, no prepayment, no internet. It's astonishing. So these, you could go up a bus really quickly. And they were also very useful for bumping into people you didn't like. So there's one in the museum now, which was gifted to it. And they weigh quite a bit. 8 hours of wearing that, knew all about it. But there were styles in it. And Boyle, the conductor, Michael Boyle, never wore it. He always carried it because he thought it was kind of cool. And the reason why he did that wasn't because it was cool, was because when the rail cars were on and the guards issued tickets, they carried a ticket rack. So he just carried on with the set right. So there you are, folks, genuine ticket. 12 and 6, you've only given me 3 and 6. But let me tell you a wee story about this. This was a duplicate bus. So it was been run behind the main bus to Strabane that day. It's taken up at Strabane. And this is Peter Friel. Peter Friel works in the stores, but he was a relief driver during the summer. And Peter, interestingly, had been appointed by Henry Forbes. He was the man who Henry Forbes' wife said to him one day, "Are you looking for a job in the railway?" "Oh, yes, please. Just come on." And that's how he started. Peter was very critical of the railway being closed. I'll say a word about that in a minute. But this bus had come down behind from Ballybofey because, unlike rail cars, you couldn't put on a trailer. You had to get another bus. And therefore, you had 2 crews, and they found there weren't the economies they perhaps thought. And why were they busy? Because the Glaswegians were going home after the Glasgow Fair holidays, referred to by the crews as the Scotches. And let me tell you a wee story about the Scotches. The Scotches used to arrive on what was called Fair Holiday Monday. Now, they had sailed from Glasgow in the Derry boat the night before. They'd probably spent some time in the bar, some of them. They then got the train down to Strabane. They got off at Strabane, and there was the CDR bus. And they'd always be piled on. They'd luggage everywhere. And some of them, like all Glaswegians, I'm okay, but some of them were just a wee bit savage, even though they were called Sweeney and O'Donnell and Dougherty and all the rest of it. And I always remember Michael Boyle being on, and he comes up, says to this guy, can you be a Glaswegian for a minute? Is that okay? It's difficult. And he says, where are you going, sir? And the guy says, "Tooty Duncan nearly went for a win." Like that. And Michael says, "Excuse me, sir." "Tooty Duncan nearly went for a win." And the guy begins to get agitated, as Glaswegians do when nobody understands you. I say, "What's the problem?" Michael sees me and says, "Hugh, can you translate, please?" So I went over to the guy and said, "Right, Jimmy," because in 1968, everybody in Glasgow was called Jimmy. When I was 14, I'm walking along the road, and the guy comes up and says, "Hey, Jimmy, have you got the time?" I thought, that's great. I'm an adult now. You know, I've made it. Anyway, I went to the guy and said, "Right, Jimmy, where are you going?" And the guy says, "Tooty Duncan nearly went for a win." And that was 2 single tickets to Dunkeneely, please, and 1 for a Wayne, 1 for my child. And the child sitting there needing his nose blown. So Julie issues the tickets to him. Now, there was fun and games 2 weeks later when the Scotches came back because the customs were waiting for them. in 1962, the Clancy brothers and Tommy Macomb came to Glasgow, and I went to see them. My mum and dad took me, my sister, and they sang, God help us, rebel songs. Now, singing rebel songs in Glasgow at any time is not a good idea, but certainly not in 1962. You know, with Johnson's motor car, the whole thing, you see. And they wore arm sweaters. So everybody wanted an arm sweater. So all the Scotches went by, and up to Ardra, they got antised and did them and so on. But you had to pay duty on them. So what happened? As the bus went up the Finn Valley, you'd see Glaswegians getting fatter and fatter and fatter as they put the sweaters on. And then they put their own clothes over the sweaters, and they're all coming off the bus like this. And of course, the customs men knew damn fine what was going on, and they all get fined. They also bought tweed out of McGee's and put to make clothes and put it around. So that was the customs, but the customs could be cruel. I remember about 1969, the Republic Customs taking butter off a woman who bought it in Strabane because it was cheaper, and they actually confiscated it. There are also contraband moved in these ticket boxes, football pools, copies of News of the World, and I believe other things that I wouldn't know anything about, travelled back and forward over the border, and no CDR crew was ever prosecuted, but a CDR lorry crew, one ended up in the jail for moving car tyres over the border in the company lorry, and there's a whole archive in him. Anyway, there it is, classic view, conductor, and conductors, by the way, were a great idea. They talked to people. You didn't have to pay as you entered. They were a companion to the driver. They looked after people. They were a mine of information. And we've lost a lot by getting rid of them. Driving, and I drove one-man buses in my last year at university. It was a very lonely job, and it still is. You find that coming up from Dublin, you know. Anyway, if we move on, there's a CDR ticket. What did it look like? Interestingly, CIE tickets were completely in Irish. Donegal tickets were in English, but shillings, pence is in Irish. Lunsa, August, there it is in Irish. And single, SINGIL. And a ticket, Filchy Lay, a day return. And they hadn't a policy in Irish in those days on the CDR. But people would come on the Port New, Glenties run, and right up through Loch Finn. And the whole transaction be done in Irish. Mountainy people came down from Fintown up the back of Arklow Mountain. And I remember seeing a student lad who was on for the summer really struggling because he spoke Book Irish. He didn't speak Donegal Irish. And he was having a problem. But Seamus Rogers, the driver who did, he sorted it all. Luckily, he didn't ask me. But anyway, so there's a typical ticket, and that's what it looked like. Right, on we go. Here's the fare stage. This is what you needed if you're a conductor. It told you all the fares and the fares. And interestingly, we use the old railway, Barnesmore Halt. There it is. Use Loch S Station, Town of Willie, Monday's Lane. I still know all these fare stages. I'm very sad. In those days, as the bus went along, the driver or the conductor changed the fare stage indicator. Now, bus ends sits, and it's all done by GPS. And you know, they're not real buses nowadays. They've got power steering and automatic gear, haven't they, Tommy? Automatic gearboxes, the whole thing. In those days, you really had to drive your bus. So there's the fare stages, and they're quite dear, the fares. They go up 50% within a year of the railway closing. And there's notices I have out the paper, 12.5% a year. So they're quite dear, relatively dear. Stranorlar to Donegal Diamond, 6 and 7. Now that's impossible to equate to our money. It's just impossible, but it was relatively dear. Right, Mark, we rumble on. Here we are, here's your weekly ticket. You issued them out the machine. Your day return ticket, your child. So you had card tickets as well. Right, on we go. This is what the conductor had to fill up the way bill. There were no computers, nothing. You actually had to write all this down, your opening numbers, your closing numbers. You had to do mental arithmetic. You know, it was very demanding. And rail tickets, there's you through rail tickets and everything. So a lot of work for the conductor. Increase in rates and fares, out the papers, 12.5%. It's a big hike for people. Because what happens in the 60s, two things happen. The number of people with cars in Donegal really begins to grow. And lots of people stop using the buses. So they've got rising costs, they've got falling passengers, and it's not any better than it was with the railway. So if we just shoot on. Now, this is the cover picture from the book you might recognise. Very interesting, because here's Michael Boyle, the conductor. He's left his ticket machine and his cash bag on the bus, which he shouldn't have done. But he's got a big bundle of papers under his arm. As the bus went along, the papers would be thrown out to various places. They carried parcels, big business and bus parcels, and they also carried mail. And over and above that, they also carried the films for the Abbey Cinema in Donegal Town. A case would come out, you'd see it sitting outside the Abbey Hotel, and it said James Bond on it. So what's he doing in there? And there it was. So it was very much, and this is the thing, we can talk about how many seats a bus had, what engine it had, and all the rest of it, but it's the impact they had on the community. Most people use them than nowadays. There they are, beautifully kept, one of the Leyland Tiger Cubs, that's called, there's its wee badge. And look how the lady is dressed up to travel. People get dressed, remember that? People get dressed up, you're my age. You put on your best clothes to travel. You didn't come your denims. By the way, I'm wearing a CDR tie today, which belonged to Danny Boyle, and his daughter Patricia presented it to me today. So I thought I really should wear it as a tribute to the CDR and to her dad. And there's two nuns there. Donegal was full of nuns. Do you remember that? There were nuns everywhere. They were, every bus you went on, 5 nuns sitting there, you know. Where did they all, are they all in plain clothes? Or did they all leave? I mean, it's any plain clothes nuns here? So yeah, and just look at the cars parked in the Diamond. And this lady's got her costume on to travel. People were very formal. They're going on to Killybegs. There's the driver, he's talking to the nuns. And on we go. So, and it's by the advert on the buses, Shannon Extra Long. The County Donegal Railways took the money of the tobacco industry. It was either that or Sweet Afton or Craven A. Do you remember those? Yeah. Oh, see, somebody's had a bad youth here. Anyway, so on we go. And what does it look like inside a Tiger Cub now? This isn't the actual bus that CDR had. This is one that is the South Ards bus group have in Northern Ireland. It's preserved. It's the same though. Imagine going from Strabane all the way to Killybegs and seats like that. Can you imagine? It was, and the roads were very rough. The roads in Donegal were unrecognisable then to the roads we have today. So people piled in. It was just like the rail car seats though, not any different. And the back door was used on busy days to pile in the luggage because these buses sadly did not have what the other ones had, and that was a roof rack. So you had to use the back door of the first 2 seats. The E-bus, however, and there's one outside, did in fact come with a roof rack, and you put prams, and the worst thing that could happen to a crew is they came round the corner and there were 20 Christian brothers on bikes. Christian brothers used to go about on bikes in sort of herds. And the conductor would say, well, I can't tell you what he would say, but the Christian brothers wouldn't like to hear it. They must have made a confession for a week afterwards. And they would say, you know, we're going to Donegal Town and we want our bikes. They had to hump this big heavy rally bikes up on top. It was hell. And there's a super story about a guy called Fergus Cleary, who was a conductor. You know Fergus? Yeah. He was a conductor, temporary conductor in 1961. He was a Donegal Personality of the Year at one time, wasn't he? He was a mental health nurse as well. The mental health nurse, that's right. Well, Fergus, he's come back from Manchester. So Fergus is conducting Port New Stranordler run. And all the Christian brothers turn up with the bikes. So he gets off and he takes his cash bag off and he hangs it in a village pump just about near Fintown. It was there. Because a lot of people didn't have running waters in the 60s in Donegal, you know. Some people don't pay for it anymore, but that's another story. And basically, he left it there. He shinned up, he put the bikes on, and off they went. I thought, I better take the fares in. Halfway along the road, he realised he'd left the cash bag on the pump. So luckily, they were passing the other bus. They flagged it down, and they retrieved the cash bag, and it was all covered up. There was another County Donegal Railways conductor, I shouldn't really tell you about, and no names, who took his whole cash bag. They maybe cash in every 2 days, depending what route they were on, and put it on the horses. And luckily, he usually won. So, no names, but he lives in Strabane. Anyway, so here's what it was like. Not that comfortable, but that was the standard everywhere at that time. You look at a bus now, you can hear the obituaries and Highland radio as you drive along, coming over it. The whole thing, nice seats, Wi-Fi, some of the bigger buses, even a toilet. What's the world come to? Whereas they would stop if you need the toilet, you know. So on we go, Mark, please. What was it like to drive these things? There's a Tiger Cub. It wasn't ergonomic, big wheel. I drove buses like this, the Leopards in Glasgow, and to go from first to second, there was a technique. You had to actually rev it up, stop, and bang it in. And if you didn't bang it in, right, it took your arm off. Some of the older drivers could drive without ever using the clutch. I never managed that. But the really interesting bit is that if you when I done a CDR bus and it passed a church in those days, everybody blessed themselves. Everybody. And Mike Macon on E152, the very bus that's out there, was passing the church in Ardra. And he just picked up a woman. He was late, so he was actually issuing her ticket. He was a one-man operator. He was issuing the ticket. He was changing from first to second gear, and he was steering, and he blessed himself all at once. And that's what I call a County Donegal Railways miracle. So these things were hard. It was a hard shift to drive one of those, as you know, coming up from Dublin. But they were well engineered for the day. They were not crude. They were well engineered. But that's what your CDR driver faced every day, Mark. Here's a nice shot, Donegal Diamond. And here, in fact, is one of the Tiger Cubs, Michael Lafferty, heading for Killybegs. And again, look at all the vintage cars. All these pictures, by the way, just a very quick bit, were taken with my trusty Instamatic camera. For those who don't remember, you put a film cartridge in this, and you sent the film cartridge away, and a week later you got your pictures. Yeah, incredible. You know, now with digital and everything, people wouldn't recognise that. So I was about 15 at the time I took that. I saved up for weeks to buy that cartridge before I went on holidays. And there were other ones I did print. I put it into the chemist, and he would say, "What's this? What are you taking pictures of buses for?" And then he revealed that his grandfather came from Ballycastle. He travelled on the Ballycastle Railway, and we sat down, we spoke railways. So there's Donegal Town, an e-bus behind, and CDR bus. Mark, can we show on? Down at Killybegs. We were through Killybegs yesterday. It's unrecognisable. That's just opposite the old station was. And they're waiting. This is the 110, the main bus that went up all the way to Strabane, took the connection from Glenties, took the connection from Ballyshannon. Really busy bus. And this is Danny Brannigan, who used to be the rail car guard, Ballyshannon, lovely guy. And he was famous in the GAA as well, Big Danny. But he was a lovely guy, to be honest with you. He was very, very knowledgeable, very cultured gentleman, and very proud of his job. So there's a classic day then. Triumph Herald, I passed my driving test on behind. And if we just go on, Mark, there's the timetable again, crest on it. And Mr. Curran's name has disappeared. Now, in 1966, B.L. Curran retired, and CIA began to decide it was time to take over the CDR, and British Railways agreed. The remarkable thing is that the CDR buses and lorry system made a good, healthy profit. The buses sometimes made a wee loss, but they corrected that. But the whole undertaking made a profit, and British Railways wanted short of it. Now, that was a really, really worrying time for all the staff. And when B.L. Curran retired, Eddie Fitzgerald, who came from Galway, was the Galway area manager for CIA, he came up to B.L.'s presentation, Jackson's Hotel, and said, "It's all right, nothing will change. You will not be hit over the head with a big stick by CIA." And everybody thought, aye, right. So his name's on it, and there's change in the air by 1966. Mark, if we rumble on, thanks. Here's the inside of the timetable. It's all laid out really well. I'm sorry you can't see these as much as I wanted to, but you can have a real look at the timetables later. Mark, if we just shoot on again. That's us. There was a whole group of places kept open by the CDR. Stranorla Railway Station, Mount Charles, I should say. Now, Miss Mulhern. Does anybody know what Miss Mulhern's was in Mount Charles? Really Mulhern's pub. Yeah. Ready's pub. That's right. Now, it says, I'll just find the right bit, in the rule book, no driver, conductor, while on duty or wearing uniform, may enter licensed premises. And then it says, except in the discharge of his duty, because Renal Mulhern's pub was the parcels office. So they were able to go into Rene's and pick up the parcels. Glenties Railway Station, phone 15. Donegal Railway Station, and they were all staffed. If you come to Donegal Railway Station, the goods shed was working. The stuff came up from Sligo, came down from Derry, and was distributed. And as late as 1968, a horse and cart ran round Donegal town, but it had rubber tyres on it. Not the horse, the cart. Do you remember that? That's right, I delivered everything. So what the CDR is saying, you might say to yourself, that's over-capitalised. Why didn't you just shut all the stations? They didn't want to. And they wanted to be quite a benevolent employer to keep people going. However, what I need to tell you is that in 1967, the CDR was taken to court by 20 employees who had not received their pensions in 1959. Guys who'd worked 40 years for them. Frank McMenamin, the driver of the last train, Lad Foy, who drove up from Strabane, and these guys had to take the CDRs to court. CDR wanted to pay the pensions, but the pensions were invested in what you called the Irish Railway Clearinghouse Scheme, and that wasn't yet converted to CIE. So these guys waited 7 years and they got back compensation. So it wasn't all light and wonder. Okay, if we move on again, please, Mark. Now here's a character for you, Mickey Lafferty of Killybegs, a CDR man true and true. In 1967, they were told to hand in their old CDR uniforms, and they're issued with CIE ones. Terrible. But Mickey kept his CDR cap. He kept it with the badge on it, and he was a great guy to talk to. I remember going up one route from Ballybofey over the Gap with him, and the sun was always shining in those days, into the glorious sunset of the west, and the tiger cubs slogging up the gradient by being Carrigan National School up to Longmorn. I'm talking to him and I said, what do you think of these buses? And he says, I either find you, but not as good as a rail car. And he would rather have been driving a rail car. But all these guys, you think about it, they were trained in the last few months of the railway through special training to get those licenses. They didn't get them. They were out the door. And there's wives and families. We forget about the cost to everybody of closing railways. It happened all over the British Isles in the 60s and the 70s. But here's Mickey, what a man. And he drove that bus like a true CDR man, definitely. And he didn't say much, but by God, he loved his job. Okay, do you want to push on? Here's down at Killybegs, and there's the old station at Killybegs, now somewhere under the new road. Peter Friel and your man, whose name is now going out of my head, but it's in the book, who was the rail car, he was the guard in the Kenny. That's his name. That's him. He was the guard on the last rail car out of Killybegs, and he was the man in charge at the station. They washed out the buses, he dispatched the lorries, and again, he's wearing his pioneer pin, and he was a real character. Great stories about the railway. So everybody staffed the railway, the staff of the buses were ex-railway and loved it. Could we move on again, please? Here is the CDR version of a bus wash. Letterkenny platform. You put it under the canopy, and you put it up on the platform, and you scrubbed it. So you didn't need a very fancy bus wash at Letterkenny. And you see that is now the bus station still in Letterkenny. If you go there, they've cut all that back. And if we go to the next, you'll see there it is looking the other way. The goods shed is still in use. There's a CIE container that's come up from Dublin, and it's been unloaded there. So it was as if the railway hadn't gone away so many ways. The character was there. If we want to move on again, sorry. The reversing under the bridge at Rosnowla. That bridge has recently been restored. And here's one of the e-buses reversing now. There's complaints by the chief friar at the friary in Rosnowla. The CDR ran a special train every Sunday, Joe Thompson, the driver, and Danny Bryan, the guard, to get people to Mass and back again the Sunday morning. There was no bus on a Sunday morning. Worse than that, the friar complained, the chief friar, nobody can get to the St. Anthony's Lily devotions on a Tuesday night. They won't change the buses for me. So that was lost. But they reversed right outside what was called Friary Halt, and on they went. Okay, if you want to. Here is E121. Now, this is a famous bus. I'll tell you why. It was a shift bus from the Glenties, Port Newron. And this is Stranorla. Look at that car, fantastic. And that's the manager's house where BL lived, right there. This bus, in fact, Danny took it home every night, 6:55 from Stranorla back to Glenties to his house. He lived in the station house. And when Danny realised that CIE was probably going to destroy the headquarters, he began to remove important bits and pieces out of the headquarters to take them to Glenties, where he was a founder member with his brother of St Connell's Museum. And that's why, if you go to St Connell's Museum, I was there yesterday, there's the Donegal Railway Room, and it's really worth a look. It's great stuff it's got. Danny removed all that, and he used the company's bus to do it. Now, he retired from CIA about 1983, but he did better, because poor old E121 was getting scrapped. So Danny got the whole front of the bus saved, took it up to Glenties, and there it is, up in the wall, pride of place, in the Donegal Railway Room, E121. So not only did he, how should we say, liberate the stuff from Sonorla, he liberated the front of the bus too. So if you want to move on, CDR Road Freight Service had its own big depot at Sonorla. I'd say a wee word about it. They had tractor units, they had flatbeds, they did sheep and cattle transport. It was a really profitable part of the business. When the railway shut at Strabane, they went on up to Derry, and the Donegal goods came over the Northern Counties Committee line to Derry, and they were unloaded there, and the CDR lorries went up and moved all the stuff. They're painted black, by the way, and not red and cream, because when CIE began to take over in 1966, they wanted to trump out independence at Stranorla, and we made them black instead of two colours. But there it is there, CDR Road Freight Services, and you saw CDR lorries everywhere. It was very much part of the county. There's one there using the old goods shed at Stranorla. Now, if you go to Stranorla Depot today, and this is interesting, the bus serving depot, if you think about it, it was first used as a transport hub in 1863 when the railway opened. It's still going today, 160 years later. Quite amazing. There's a great heritage there. But if you go there, that was demolished, and they opened a brand new goods shed, which was in use till 1993 for road freight. And then Irish Rail kind of pulled out the whole thing. They were a big haulier in the country. But look at that, it's there. And there's the signal box is still intact. So there's this great feeling that maybe if you waited long enough, the whole railway might come back to life, which it has done, of course, at Bintown, and it has done down here too. And it will do in the Barnsmore Gap. Please God, I live to see it. We'll be there. Okay, Mark, if we shove on. Now, and it is backwards, sorry. The slide was reversed. This is the bus that's outside there, E152. It was a shift bus. I'll tell you a couple of stories about it. From, what's his name, from Donegal Town. It's travelled down 85 through Glenties coming from Portneuf. Mike Meekin was the driver, and he brought it down here. He had a nice break most days, and at 6:15 he drove back up. He did a couple of fill-ins down here, and he parked it there just outside Nairn. And look, it's made of an old bed end. The CDR bought this or hired it from a way back in 1935 or 6, and they used it. And he would leave the ticket machine and the money in the bus overnight, and it never went missing. Can you imagine that nowadays? The whole bus would go missing. Well, actually, it did at Letterkenny 2 weeks ago, but no, let's not go into that. So there it is, fantastic. And what you're looking at is the Irish country bus, the golden age of it. Very much part of the community, very much part of Donegal, and distinctly Donegal. And my wife and I were just saying yesterday, maybe coming to Donegal for years, it's losing a wee bit of its character, isn't it? In some ways, you know, with the internet and everything, everywhere is that wee bit less like it used to be. Whereas in these days, you came here, you get distinctive buses, you get distinctive lorries. The place was more of its own, and it wasn't quite so much ruled by the internet. But that's just my personal rave. Okay, we move on. The poor old Tiger Cubs by 1970 were getting a bit old. They were getting a bit worn out. And here they had to bring in a school service Bedford, which the crews hated because they were very noisy. And this is at Stranorla. And again, you've got the old railway buildings behind. Now, as soon as CIE took over, in 1974, they demolished the lot. They got rid of Stranorla. They got rid of local independence. Yeah. But to be fair to them, they wanted to build that big new facility. And there was a rumour then, in 1971, that they were going to take over the Lost Swilly as well. That rumour has come and gone over the years. Never happened. And the poor old Lost Swilly went bust in 2014. So on we go. There's the poor old Tiger Cubs on the scrap heap at Stranorla. The station's there. There's a P-bus. All the buildings are there. And this is the spot that traditionally took the old scrap trains. So it was a great tradition. So I used to love to go to Stranorla because if you ask nicely, they opened up the general stores. And there was a rail car, number 12. I-18 was there as well, and an engine. And they were saved in 1974 and CIA bulldozed a lot. So if we move on, here is the Donegal bus E152 at Moss Hotel between Glenties and Portneuf. You're looking up the Gibara Bay. Who would do that nowadays in the field? You know, it's of its time. And I think, well, maybe up by Fintown, right? But what I would say,
Climate change, right?
Climate change, right? Yeah, right. Greta was right. What I would say is that the CDR buses, it's a bit of a philosophical thought, but they existed in a different time from today. Things were different. Life was slower. It was quite different altogether. It was a cash economy. There was lots of people still emigrating from Donegal at that time. There were lots of people who were a lot less well off today. And there weren't a lot of homes with 16 rooms, all en suite, and 2 children in them. So, you know, the bungalow boom hadn't happened, the tiger economy hadn't happened. So it was much more, and there weren't as many cars on the road, but that soon changes. Right, if we rumble on. E152 in Mount Charles. That was a really busy bus, the 615 from Donegal town. And on a fair day, I was on it, Donegal Fair Day, Mike Meakin's taking the fares, and on comes a guy, and he's got a wee calf under his arm. He just comes on this wee calf, you know. And Mike doesn't, it says in the rule book you charge for a dog, nothing in the rule book about a calf. And it sort of goes moo, so just sit there. And another guy brought on a drum of liquid manure, and off we went, all the way down. With a duplicate to Frost's. Busy bus. That route exists partly as part of Bus Services, but there's Mount Charles, now bypassed, of course. But that was your approach, and Reading Mulherns was just over here. So on we go. Now, here's E121 leaving Ballybofey for Portneuf with classic wee ladies of the time with the wee coats and the wee bags to balance them. Do you remember wee ladies like that? They always went there shopping. And I'll tell you a terrible story, because don't worry, we're not going much longer before we all die of heat stroke. If you put on your arm sweaters, it could have been even better. I was sitting in this bus one night in 1968 with Danny Boyle, been up to the office at Stranorla. We had a good natter. We'd been up to Strabane, and we're talking buses, you see. And suddenly in came the bus from Strabane, and I heard a voice saying, "Just put that on the other bus, conductor." And I froze, because it was my fearful Aunt Florence from Glasgow. She'd gone into the central station and bought herself a through ticket to Glenties, and she hadn't told us she was coming. She appeared out of nowhere. She was 75 at the time. Just appeared from nowhere. She was a fearsome primary school teacher. She frightened generations of people. And there's poor Michael Boyle, the suitcase. You know? And then she was known as Aunt Florence. Aunt Florence, you know? And she doesn't think it's strange that I'm sitting in this bus in the middle of Donegal talking to somebody. She gets on, poor Seamus Rogers, she gets a ticket stuck in his face. I've got a ticket, you know. And she sits down as if she hasn't come from me. She's come all the way from Glasgow. And she says to Danny, "Oh, do you know, Hugh, I just tell you, you can't expect much from these country buses, can you?" And that was it. And, we got rid of her 2 days later. But anyway, so that is my memory of that. But that was a very, very busy bus at times. And the connection came in from Strabane. By the end of the 70s, there's fewer people travelling in the buses. It's quite sad, actually. Numbers go down. And you find that after CIA takeover, some of these routes disappear, but are now covered quite often by local link as well. So on we go. Here is the Belfast Express loading with Fruitfield Jam on the side. Great, I love Fruitfield Jam. And what happened was the CDR wanted to get better connections after the railway closed through Strabane. So they sat down with Ulster Bus and they came up with this express service. And this is Collins Lafferty. He's busy. Here's Mickey helping put them on. And again, at Donegal Town. And if you wonder, did the sun always shine in the 60s in Donegal? It's just that with that camera, you had to wait for the sun to shine before you took the picture. So here we go. There's the express coach service. You can get to Glenties. You can get to Mount Charles. Wonderful. Steamers from Belfast. There were still steamers from Belfast because air travel hadn't jumped in. But just let me tell you, a terrible thing happened to the Scottish traffic. The Scottish traffic all but disappeared from 1968 onwards. Why? You're asking. Well, I know you're asking yourself, asking me. I'll tell you. In 1967, Glasgow Celtic won the European Cup in Lisbon, and tons of people of Donegal extraction who were Celtic supporters for the first time in their life got in a plane, flew to a sunny place, Lisbon. instead of coming by the train, the boat, the bus to Donegal, and never came back. And in 1968, Danny said to me, "Come on up, and we'll see the Scotches arriving. It's always good for a laugh." So we went up with a duplicate bus, and they didn't need it because hardly any Scotches got off at all. So the decline of the County Donegal Railways is partly attributable to Glasgow Celtic winning the European Cup. There you are. So on we go, Matt. Now here, coming up to 1971, this is down at Killybegs. All the Tiger Cubs have gone, and we're running e-buses, which were brilliant buses. They were wonderfully well designed, but that's at Killybegs. Again, that's under the road, and the end is coming. So if we rumble on, Mark. Strabane, when the station closed at Strabane, they went up by Abercorn Square, and complaints were received in 1962 because in the good old days, when you came from Killybegs to Strabane in the rail car with 13 children in tow, that was the Scotches, you were able to get them all into the toilet at the station before you got on the train to Belfast. But when the station closed, there was only one small toilet at Strabane in Abercorn Square. And if you read the Strabane paper in 1962, the councillors are complaining about queues of people waiting for this one toilet, and the Ulster bus or the UTA bus driver hanging out the window, swearing at them to hurry up and get on his bus. So that was a facility that was lost. But there's Strabane. The other thing about Strabane is people from Strabane. Anybody from Strabane here? No, good. We can say it then. People from Strabane love smuggling. They're good at that. But on a Sunday, on the old days of the railway, a train would run all the way from Strabane down to Rossnowla and to Ballyshannon. And those were great excursions. So the CDR buses replicated that. They put on these excursions on a Sunday. And they took people down to Bundoran, where they spent all the money in the Bargain Kings. It rained, of course. And they were very popular. On some days, 8 CDR buses would leave Strabane. And it was lots of overtime for the crews, but it meant a 7-day working week. And Collins Lafferty's son, who was a surgeon in Dublin, told me that in the summer, he hardly saw his dad because he was working 7 days a week. No tachographs, no regulations. You could work a guy double shifts and anything you liked. So that's the end up of the CDR. The end comes, okay, keep going now. CIE take over. And what have we got left? Well, we've got this wee bus. And this is the very first item of County Donegal Railways rolling stock made by a company called Oxford Diecast, which has ever been made. And this is it in my layout at home. There's an e-bus up there. And there's a wee halt here. And they're about to leave for Letterkenny. The company asked me for information on doing that, which I gladly gave them. And it's the very first time. Who would have thought that anybody would have made a commercial model of a CDR bus? Amazing. So on we go. So we've got a model left. When they knocked down the Stranorlar, 2 of the guys got a man to cast in concrete the Finn Valley Railway crest from the old station and stuck it up above the CDR garage to really annoy CIE. Now, that disappeared about 1987. Nobody knows what happened to it, but it disappeared. So CIE come in and they try to make sure 1971 the CDR is not a separate entity, you're part of CIE. And that was a worrying time for the staff again. But that's what they did. And what you'll find today, if you want, Mark, thanks. There's E121 in Gwenty's Museum, the one we talked about, the one that Danny Boyle not only brought home the loot, but pinched the front of the bus too. And what a man he was. And there it is there. Leyland Leopard E121 came up. If you go to the station there, the museum at St Connell's, lots of CDR bus tickets that he also brought about. So there's tons in there. Mark, if we go on. If you go to Stranorlar, those are the clock faces from Stranorlar, which are up there, put up there at the Millennium. There's the name board, and there's the depot behind. And if we go on, Mark, if you'd come to Strabane, it's quite interesting, to Donegal Town. This is 1978. The CIE have taken over. It doesn't look that different, does it? It's the same buses, it's the same crews, but within a few years, all these are withdrawn. And CIE, of course, becomes Bus Erin eventually, and even it disappears. So it's a time of change, but there's Donegal Town again, and we're coming on. What else is left but this bus that's out there, which has been preserved by Mr. Ian Malloy, and this is when it came up to Donegal in 2004. 2004, he just bought it in 2000. It was getting restored, and now it is in magnificent condition, and you must go out and see it. There it is. And when I saw that again, E152, I thought, That's amazing, that day. I remembered the blessing. I remembered the calf. I remembered all the things that happened on it. I tried to forget my Aunt Florence, but that was difficult. And there's something that a tangible link, which is there today in working order. Right, Mark? Now, you ask, what is this doing here? Well, if the CDR had continued, and let's imagine it did, what would it have looked like today? It wouldn't have been red and cream. It probably have looked like this. This is a company called West Coast Motors in Campbelltown in Scotland. It's red and cream. It's got a crest. And interestingly, it had replaced the Campbelltown Microhannies narrow gauge railway in the 30s. And I reckon if the CDR buses had survived, they might have looked like something like that. What do you think? Yeah, you know, so there you are. Could have been that. So every time I see one of those at home, I go, you know, so there we are. Anyway, I think we are, yeah. Now, I want to just say a word about Danny Boyle, but before I do that, what I'd like to do is ask Patricia to come forward instead quickly doing the place in. Can you manage to come forward? Should I give you the right one? Now, Patricia Boyle is the daughter of the late Danny Boyle, and this is Danny here in the room. No, you're fine, you're fine. And I can't say thanks personally to Danny, but I can say to the Boyle family, Patricia. So Patricia, I'd like to present you with this copy of the book, and thank you very much, and thank you so much for the time.
Not at all. It's a privilege.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, just before we finish, are there any questions? Have I blasted you all into silence?
I see that Mickey Boyle you were chatting about.
Yeah.
Did he go and be an inspector?
He did, yes.
I remember him.
He became inspector. Him and Danny Brannigan both became inspectors. They were the last conductors on the Finn Valley section. And CIE took them on as conductors. Within a couple of years, you're absolutely right, he became an inspector. That's right. He was the man in charge of the station at Loch S. That's right. Yeah. That's right. That's right. Well, listen, I hope you enjoyed that. And I'm sorry if you couldn't hear me sort in the back, but did my best.
Just,
Thanks very much.
just before we go, I want to say thanks to Hugh. He's done a lot of work for us here. He's supported us over the years. So a big thank you to him. And with that, we'd like to make you honorary member.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I'm really honoured. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I'm honoured. That's so nice of you. Thank you very much.
Thanks for everything you've done.
No,
for us and
no.
helping and
Thank you
supporting
so much. Thank you.
us. Right. With that, I'll end the broadcast. So it'll be live on Facebook later on, so you can catch up with it and get close-ups of our slides that we're showing there. Thank you, everybody. Go out and have a good look at the bus.
Oh, it's hot in here.
We're getting a bit of fresh air. Thanks so much.
Enjoy that. Good.
I didn't expect it to be so